Yeah, this is tea time. Yeah, making a difference, one cup at a time. Tea time. So be sure to grab your tea, grab a seat, and tune in to Miss Liz. Tea time. Making a difference, one cup at a time. Tea time, yeah. Tea time.
Good morning. It is morning tea time. That's right. We are up early this morning and we have an incredible guest in the studio with us. We have the incredible Vikki Starks in from Montreal, Canada. That's right. This morning and this evening we have a double tea time. So be sure to check out the next tea time at 7 p.m. when we have JP Maclean coming in as well. But today we're going to talk about a topic that may trigger some people. So I'm going to put a trigger warning out there for each and every one of you who tune in today and may watch the replay. So we're going to do the disclaimer, and then I'm going to bring in Vikki with a little bit of intro of her bio, and then we're going to sit back and we're going to learn a little bit about runaway husbands. That's right. Today's topic is runaway husbands. It is wife abandonment syndrome. It is a topic that is very needed, and the awareness needs to be out there. So this is why Vikki is joining me this morning. The disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live shows. Miss Liz myself is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment, please grant StreamYard permission to see your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that the content brought forward for any Tea Time show hosted by myself, Miss Liz, is always brought forward in good faith, however may bring forth dialogue and opinions that are not representative of my platform. The facts and information are perceived to be accurate at the given time of airing. All Tea Time guests and audience participants are responsible for using their good judgment in taking any action that may relate to this discussion. The content brought forward may include discussions for some where they may be emotionally at risk. It is significant to know that this show is engaging in discussion forums only to offer and inspire awareness and connection and is not providing therapeutical advice. If you have any questions about the disclaimer or the panelist discussion, you may freely contact me, Miss Liz, through my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com. Moving forward, should you choose to voluntarily participate in today's show in any aspect, I, Miss Liz, welcomes you. Should you decide that the show is not made for you at this time, I respect that choice and I will see you at a later show at a later time. Now I'm going to do a little quick bio intro of Vikki Stark, and then I'm going to jump her into the studio and we're going to sit back and we're going to learn a little bit of wife abandonment syndrome today. Vikki Stark is an MSW, is an international known psychotherapist. I hope I'm saying this right. Psychotherapist, family therapist, speaker, author, and divorce recovery expert, and the director of the Sedona Counselling Center of Montreal. She is particularly known for her groundbreaking work on wife abandonment syndrome, as well as her work on gender and couples. Vikki is a familiar face on television and radio and has been a guest on NBC, The Today Show, CBC, CTV, Global, Oprah Radio, and written about in USA Today, the New York Daily News, and Maclean's magazine, among many others. She has had more than 3 million views on her blog on Psychology Today magazine called Schlepping. I'm going to get her to say that word for me. Through Heartbreak, which deals with all aspects of relationships. For more on Vikki's bio, check out Miss Liz's Facebook page. And I'm going to jump Vikki in and I'm going to grab a cup of tea, a little sip. My throat is starting to dry up a bit. And we will have a good discussion this morning. Please leave your comments. And if they are related to the discussion, they will be seen so Vikki can see your questions in that.
Hi.
Welcome, Vikki.
Hi, Liz. So the name of my blog is called Schlepping Through Heartbreak.
Schlepping.
It means dragging yourself through heartbreak.
My tongue sometimes it just rolls, and I'm just like,
not the easiest word. I have to admit that. Yeah.
Well, welcome, Vikki. It's nice to have you here with me this morning. So I want to speak a little bit on the topic runaway husbands. Where did you get that topic from, and how did it all begin?
Okay, so I am a therapist. I'm a family therapist and a marriage counselor and a psychotherapist. And I had been working in the field for about 25 years when in 2006, my marriage sort of disintegrated. So I had been what I thought was in a very happy, secure marriage for 21 years. And my husband had never said that he was unhappy or thinking of leaving or that there were any big problems. And then one day, so I had been on a book tour across America for my first book, which is about sister relationships. It's called My Sister, Myself. And when I came home after 23 days on the road, he picked me up at the airport and drove me to our home. And he went off to work. And when he got home that night, he walked in the door. I gave him a hug. And I said to him, I bought fish. I was going to make fish for dinner. And he said, it's over. And I said, okay, you don't want fish? We'll have chicken. And he said, no, it's over. The marriage is over and I'm leaving right now. And so it came so totally out of the blue, just like that. I couldn't believe it. And then he did stay that night. But by the next morning, he'd thrown all of his stuff into garbage bags, threw them in the trunk of his car. And he was off and moved in with his girlfriend of 6 years.
Oh, wow.
So here, I'm a marriage counselor, right? So if anyone should have been able to see the signs, it should have been me. And so, of course, I was completely traumatized, devastated, shocked, as was everyone who knew him. And I had already written my first book. So as time went on, people were saying, you know, you should write a book about this. And I started researching this phenomenon of a man who appears to be totally engaged. We had all sorts of plans. We were going to go on a trip. He had never said anything. And then he suddenly bolts out of the marriage. And I realized that there was really practically nothing written on the topic. So I started researching it with other women. And I did a study in which 400 women worldwide participated and sent in their questionnaires. And then I interviewed another 100 or something face to face. And I found out that for a lot of other women, they had experienced exactly the same thing, where they were in a happy, secure marriage with no indication that there was a problem until the day the husband said one of two things, which is like, I can't do this anymore, or it's over. And then they typically leave within the day or within the week. So it's so it became, and then the other thing that sort of was shocking to me as I started hearing from these other women is that the stories were almost identical. They were eerily the same. That the husband sort of blurts this out in the middle of just an ordinary conversation. He doesn't say to his wife, "Come here, I have to sit down. Sit down. We have to talk about things." That he typically leaves right away. And then he turns from the loving, caring husband that he was in the marriage into an angry stranger. And so although the wife is crying and distraught and traumatized and upset, and the women in my community, typically like myself, I lost 30 pounds. I was so traumatized. But the husband seems not to care at all. So there's this really dramatic shift in the person that you knew. And that's one of the hardest parts for the women who have experienced this, because, as we know, marriages sometimes break up.
Yeah.
And women leave, men leave. And usually in those cases, people know that there's a problem. They've been to marriage counseling, they've had fights, they've talked about it. It's obvious that the marriage is on the rocks, somebody's sleeping in the guest bedroom. But in the Runaway Husbands scenario, which I came to call Wife Abandonment Syndrome, there's none of that. So, the fact that all of these different elements were identical from woman to woman to woman, that he leaves suddenly, that he makes up excuses why he's leaving that are like, the women are just flabbergasted, like they can't understand, what is he talking about?
Yeah.
And so the excuses that he gives for leaving are very nonsensical or flimsy. He typically, in 99% of the cases, has another woman. and very often moves in directly from the wife's home to move in with the other woman. And then he sort of becomes like a denier for everything that happened in the marriage. Like he'll say, I was never happy from day one. I was thinking of leaving, that trip that we took to California where we thought it was so great. Well, I was miserable the whole time. And the wife is like, this does not compute. I don't understand what you're talking about. So all of that undoing of the marriage is also another aspect of wife abandonment syndrome. So as I saw, that there was, this tremendous correlation between all of the different women, then I started writing the book that's called Runaway Husbands. And then out of the book, I developed my online community, runawayhusbands.com. And we have women helping women through this trauma. So we have all sorts of services and workshops and other books, other spin-off books, and other things that are available to women. But mostly it's because when this happens to someone, the way it happened to me, completely out of the blue, most women never heard about it. And they feel like they're completely alone. This is not a normal divorce. This hasn't happened to anyone else. So they feel alone and they feel like they're crazy. I must be losing my mind. He's saying that was bad when I know it was good. He was happy. We were laughing. We had a good time. And so when they find the Runaway Husbands community and they realize that there is an explanation to all of this, then they realize they're not alone and they're not crazy.
So we have a question here, Vikki, for you.
Yes.
The Runaway Husbands, and some of the questions are not coming up because they're actually personally messaging me. They want to know if the runaway husband has narcissistic traits in them.
Yeah. That's a great question. So this is in recent years. So I've been doing this work since 2006. And in recent years, women have been talking to me about covert narcissism.
Okay.
So the typical runaway husband marriage is that the husband, like my husband, was very present, very engaged, very loving, very available, a sweetheart, not a difficult, angry man. And that's the typical runaway husband. He's the soccer coach. He's helping with the kids. He's available. He's available. But then when he leaves, you see another side of his personality, and he withdraws from the wife, all emotional connection, and reattaches to this other woman. And it's only when he leaves that you can see the covert narcissistic traits. So now the definition of covert narcissism is that you don't see it. It's covert. It's hidden. You don't see it in certain circumstances. When it suits him to be part of the marriage, when it suits his identity, his self-image, to be the great guy, the one who helps out, the dad, the husband, the great son-in-law, when it suits him, then he can really expand in that role. But then when it no longer is meeting his needs, then he really doesn't care at all. And that's the narcissistic element of it. So that we look at how he is in the marriage, where he emotionally or narcissistically is being fed by being the great guy and the loving husband, but that there's not a real genuine connection there. It's a superficial connection. And it only becomes visible when his interests start to lie someplace else. When he gets involved and interested in the other woman and in the other life, and then he can throw over his wife and in some cases his children, in order to start living a different life. And that's when the narcissistic traits become visible. So I'm not saying that all runaway husbands are narcissists, and I don't think that mine was, but quite a number of them are. And it does help the women to get that explanation, because while during the marriage, they're not obviously narcissistic. They don't have to be the loudest guy in the room who's getting all the attention.
Yeah.
And so that's where the covert aspect of it comes in.
So it's almost like a double life, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, for any of the viewers that are listening or that will watch the replay later, a double life is almost like having two different lives. Now, Vicky, I want to ask you, he leaves the wife, right? Now, if he has another partner that he moves in with, does he do the same to her? Is it a repeat pattern or is it only to the wife?
Well, frankly, I don't really have access to the men.
Okay.
So I don't really know what happens after he leaves. I mean, I hear from the wives, because I have this large community of the women, that he married the other woman. He now has children with the other woman and he's moving on. And we don't know whether he stays with her or whether he leaves her. In some, it's hard to know. But, I wouldn't be surprised if once time goes on because one of the things I always say to the women in my community is that, and they all say, I was a devoted wife. I was there for him. Even we had a lively sexual relationship, or, we were, really connected. So why would he be distracted by someone else? And what I say to the women is that she has something you'll never have. And that's she's new. And there's nothing like the pull
Yeah.
of being with exciting new person, not the woman that you slept with for 34 years. And so there's that excitement of the new. So when he's living with the other woman for another 10 years, she's not going to be new anymore. So chances are it will stop meeting his needs. But who knows?
So it could be a repeat pattern.
Could be. Yeah, could be.
So, Vicky, you mentioned signs. So now that you look back, were there signs that you weren't
No,
seeing?
no,
There was none at all, right?
no. Really, in my case, there really weren't signs. I mean, in my book, in Runaway Husbands, in the end, I talk about, what happily married women might need to know. Okay, were there signs? Yes, he started going to the gym, but that's a soft sign. He started buying like jazzier gym clothes, red gym, like that was totally not him. The red
So
gym.
something different, a completely different color of wardrobe and stuff.
Yeah, but that's I wouldn't say if somebody's husband starts going to the gym and buys red gym clothes that you should.
Yeah, we're not saying that if your husband changes the color of clothes. But
And
it's often like that, right? Any form of abandonment, there's usually no signs, and then we're in that shock mode, right? We're in that
yeah,
fog of
yes,
what did we do wrong? What did we say something wrong? Did we look wrong? Like, we start
exactly.
within
Yeah,
ourselves, right?
yeah, I'm so glad you raised that, Liz. I'm so glad because this is such a fundamental thing. That the women in my community, then they do the self-blame dance. If only I was more attentive. He said I wasn't attentive enough. Well, you were living your lives. You were raising, two teenagers. How attentive do you need to be? And how much do you need to stroke his ego and say, oh,
Yeah.
George, you look so handsome. You're so great. And so that they do this self-blame dance, which is, he wasn't that attentive to her either. You were just living a normal life, and because you didn't know that there was a problem, you didn't know that something needed to be tinkered with. But it's very easy for the women to blame themselves because the husband leaves and then he turns around and he blames her. He says it's because you were like this and you weren't like that. And often they say, you were too controlling. This is very common. You were too controlling. And here, I'm going to unpack that for our listeners and viewers, which is, he says you were too controlling. And what that means is that when they were planning a vacation, she'd say to him, do you want to go to the beach? He says, sure, whatever you want. She'd say, you want to go to the mountains? Yeah, the mountains are good too. You do that. And so she would make, you be in charge of everything. So he would leave everything in her hands. She would make all the decisions. And then when he leaves, he says, you were too controlling.
Wow.
And so, so that he will then blame her and heap the blame on her. And of course she's going to take it on. And so she then starts to question herself. And I work so hard with the women, that I meet with, trying to help them understand that you didn't have to be a perfect wife. Nobody has to be a perfect wife. He was not a perfect husband. You were living your lives, you were doing the best you could, and if he had problems or issues, he could come and talk to you about it. The reason he left was not because you were not a perfect wife. Somehow he managed to stay with you for 34 years when you weren't perfect. Why did he leave? Because of something going on inside of himself. So that's that shift that took place inside of him is really the motivator for him leaving for various reasons, which I can explain. But then when he leaves, rather than to say, oh, I'm going through some changes, they don't say that. Rather, they say, it's your fault because you're too messy and you leave all the shoes by the front door when I asked you 100 times not to do that. Well, yes, it is annoying that she left the shoes, but that's not why he left her. And so then the women feel, full of regret, and they wish they could roll back time and do things differently. But really the message is it's because of some change taking place inside of him. Now, when my husband left, I didn't feel any blame. I knew that, sometimes I can be annoying or I can change my mind too much or whatever. Absolutely. I totally know that. But I also knew, because he'd had this long-term affair, that it really wasn't about me. I was able from the beginning to not lose that level of self-esteem. But for so many women, that's really a challenge, and it's always and it goes hand in hand with when your person asked about is narcissism part of the issue, that the wives, on the other hand, tend to be the empath. The wives who are just giving and caring and self-sacrificing.
So Vikki, you said that your husband had an affair for 6 years. So did that help a little bit with him leaving to understand that it wasn't like the self-blame didn't happen with you because there was another person? But what about the husbands that leave that don't have anybody, that just leave?
That's harder. Definitely, that's harder. It's very unusual in our community. In this particular paradigm, it's unusual, but it's definitely harder because then it feels like, he's leaving because he wants to get away from the wife. And they all want to get away from the wife. Yeah. But at least it's an explanation. Oh, yeah, he's the kind of guy, he's having an affair. So that brings him down in, his status. But that, definitely that's true. That if there's and I've had women in the community who said, I wish I could find out about an affair because it would make me feel better. Pardon me. And often the affair doesn't come to light until 6 months later. He keeps it hidden because he doesn't want the kids to know that he's having an affair or whatever. And then, slowly, information has a way of dribbling out, and she learns about the fact that he'd been having an affair for a year, let's say. So, yeah. So, but that definitely is the case, that it helps as an explanation.
So with your work that you've done with women, and you've done work with women globally, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So what countries have you worked with?
Yeah. So, the majority of the people that I work with when I lead a retreat, and I do a lot of online retreats or like that, tend to be in the United States and Canada and Britain, Australia, New Zealand. So those are the major countries, areas of the world that participate. But I've worked with women, I did a session with a woman in Mongolia. And the funny thing is, it's not like she was an American living in Mongolia. She was a Mongolian living in Mongolia. And I've worked with women all over the world in Amsterdam, in Hong Kong, in Ghana. We have a group in Nigeria and Ghana. And sometimes we put the groups together so that all the women who have experienced runaway husbands in Ghana get together and they meet together without me. They just act as a support group for each other. So it's so wonderful, that there's not a group in every city in the world, but in many, many cities in the world, there are groups where the women can actually meet independently and provide that understanding and support for each other.
So you're mentioning retreats. Are these like retreats for women to get together, like a share and support retreat? What type of retreat is it, Vikki?
Okay. So about 2 weeks ago, I got back from, every year I do a retreat in Sedona, Arizona. The Sedona retreat. It's a 5-day retreat. This particular one, women came from Britain, the United States, and Canada. And it's a mix. When the Sedona retreat is a mix where I give a workshop every day about this topic. But then part of the healing is that we do these wonderful experiences together. Like, for example, we spent an afternoon with a shaman, and we had a wonderful healing experience with the shaman. Or they have a morning of a massage in the spa. Or I take them on an adventure trip. Or we do a hike in the woods and we just commune with nature, a silent hike in the woods. So we do the different activities. But really what happens is that when the women get together, the bonding is unbelievable. It doesn't even take a day. They're so relieved to be around other people who understand. Because a lot of people feel like, their friends and family, they feel like, oh, 40% of the population gets divorced. You should start getting better by now. And for women who have been traumatized and betrayed to this extent, you don't get better in 6 months or a year. It's a process. And so other people tend not to understand. Even other therapists don't understand. They think there's something wrong, that it's taking a while for women to recover. But that's not the issue. It's not a problem. It's because of the level of trauma that the women have experienced. So we do the Sedona retreat. I have a retreat in January online. That's a 1-day retreat. It's an international retreat. I timed it so that we can have people in Europe and Canada and the United States all over. And that's called the Jump Up. And it's a 5.5-hour retreat with 3 workshops. And sometimes we might have even 40 or 50 people come to one of those retreats. I have another retreat called A Course on Happiness. And it's not about why your husband left, but it's about how to take a crisis in your life and turn it into an opportunity for change. It's about now and moving forward. And then I have a wonderful creative arts therapist who's this weekend is doing a vision boards workshop, and she does a creative writing workshop. So we have a lot of stuff going on. And I also run an 8-session therapy group. It's, like 8 Tuesdays in a row. And that's like a classic therapy group where the women get together and just talk about what's on their mind. And it's also another opportunity to make friends and make community. And after the groups and retreats are over, they tend to stay in touch with each other, and they'll continue meeting and they'll visit each other. And, it's really beautiful.
So I noticed on your website here, Vikki, you have the Runaway Husbands book, and you also have the Planet Heartbreak book. Could you tell me a little bit about the Planet Heartbreak book?
Yeah. So, the part of the healing experience for women is being able to hear the stories of other women. So when we have a retreat, often we give them 3-4 minutes. If we have a lot of people on the retreat, we don't have a lot of time. So we give them 3-4 minutes to tell their story. But in Planet Heartbreak, I had 62 women who told their story in more depth.
Wow.
And so they told what happened to them. And then they told what resources they used to recover and move on. And so the book gives an opportunity for a woman to read it and say, oh yeah, that same thing happened to me. I really get this. Oh my goodness, this is really me. And then what did she do to move on? What techniques did she use? What helped her? What are her thoughts? How are her belief systems helping her move into a stage of recovery? So that's Planet Heartbreak. It's 62 stories written by women in the Runaway Husbands community about their their experience and their healing.
So if anybody wanted to get a copy of these two books, where could they get them?
Well, they're both on Amazon, but you can also get them from the runawayhusbands.com website.
And the website is seen on the screen. So for the people that are watching the video show of today's Tea Time, you can see the link right on the screen. For the audio listeners, that will be all in the description. So everything that Vikki is sharing will all be in the description. And if you need any further information about Vikki, you can reach out to me, Miss Liz. Now, Vikki, I want to just change it up just for a few minutes, and then we're going to get back into Runaway Husbands a little bit more. So, what if I asked you what your tea is today? What would your tea be?
So it's an interesting question, and I think that what jumps into my mind is to trust yourself. You know, I always have in mind what the women of my community are going through, and what happens to them is that they lose trust. They say, "How can I ever trust somebody again? You know, I thought he was a totally, involved, trustworthy person. And then I learned that was an illusion and he betrayed me." So, but then they can't trust themselves. How am I going to trust my judgment? You know, they feel like they made a mistake the first time. They didn't make a mistake the first time. They had no way of knowing. It was all hidden. But they lose trust in themselves. And so it's so important to be able to have self-compassion, to be kind to yourself, and to trust yourself. And to recognize that it's okay to make mistakes. Nobody said we're going to go from birth to death without ever making a mistake. We're all going to make mistakes. It's okay. But to learn to trust yourself it's a fundamental thing in life, because you can't move forward unless you can trust that you can see the road ahead of you, that you can see the steps ahead of you. And even if you stumble, that's okay. It's all right. So that would be my T. Trust yourself.
And what would your E be?
So my E is sort of jumps off from trust yourself, which would be empowerment. And I'm sure that that's the E for a lot of people, is empowerment. Because a lot of the women in my community feel like, I can't do anything without him. What am I going to do now? I have to go back to work. I have to start making money. I have to learn how to run a household or buy a car or something. And they don't feel empowered. And really, they have to find their own inner power so that they can move forward in life. And so it's important for women, and sometimes I say this, to pour some steel in your spine, sit up straight and say to yourself, I'm going to do this. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to, I can be an independent person. I have what it takes in order to succeed in my own life. I don't need to depend on somebody else. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But if I don't have somebody else to depend on, that's fine. I can make a community of friends, and relations and family, and I can empower myself. So that would be my E.
And what would your A be?
So the A comes from that, which is affirmation. And on my retreat, I talk about, really using affirmations. And I really believe that they are powerful. And this goes with the idea of how you talk to yourself affects how you feel about yourself. So a woman said to me the other day, she said, "Oh, I'm 60 years old. My husband left. I don't think I'll ever meet anybody. I'm going to be an old maid." Yeah. Old maid? What are we, in the 15th century? Like, there's no old maid. You can be 70 or 80 and be an empowered individual, even if you're single. But that was her belief. So if she were to make an affirmation and say to herself every day, I have a future ahead of me, even if she doesn't believe it, and that's how affirmations work. You don't have to believe them. Just by saying, I have a future ahead of me, or I have a bright future ahead of me, then suddenly it introduces the possibility that that may be true. So if you say to yourself every day, nobody will want me, I'm going to be an old maid, then, you know, that's that it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. But if you say to yourself, I have a bright future ahead, or good things are on the horizon, or I don't even know what's coming, but I'm going to make it good. Whether that's true or not, it doesn't matter. By saying it, you're changing the energy
Yep.
force. You know, you're changing your emotional energy. If I'm going to be a psychologist and not a new age person, you're changing your emotional energy. And that's very important. So it's reaching for the light, reaching for the positivity in life. And
Well,
that's through
and
affirmations. Yeah.
go ahead, Vikki.
Yeah.
Your tea is a really strong tea, and the whole time while I was preparing your tea time was the word trust that kept coming to mind. Was
Yes.
because there has to be trust issues after something like this happens.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And some of the women feel like, I can't trust him, but how can I trust my friends either? That's one of the biggest struggles. First of all, to love yourself again, to love yourself and not feel like a loser.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a middle-aged woman and I'm alone. You know, how pathetic. You know, and to feel as though women who are married have more cred, you know, are more valuable than women who are single, which is not true. But so it's, and this is where a crisis forces you to grow, because you have to challenge that internal narrative that I'm not so good, and that I won't be able to trust again. What I always ask the women is, are there other men in your life that you know about, that are trustworthy? Like, for example, my father, your brother, you know, your friend from high school. You know, just because you've learned that your husband was unable to sustain a long-term relationship and to end it in a decent and respectful way, and so you lost trust in him, don't generalize it to the rest of the world. And that's a struggle that forces the woman to grow inside so that she can have that positive expectation of other people in the future. And the thing that I like to say is that I'd rather be hurt and disappointed because I let someone in my life than to build a wall and never let anybody in my life and be perfectly safe behind my wall, but live a very constricted and, life.
I like that you mentioned that because I'm a survivor of abuse, right?
Yes.
But I haven't been a survivor of runaway husbands. But I do relate and resonate with some of what you're saying as a survivor, and having that wall built up,
Yes.
because you don't trust people, because you've been betrayed, because you've been hurt. It is hard, you
Yes.
know. So how do we work through those steps? Like, what tools and tips would you have for women that do put those walls up? Because I'm one of those women that will put that wall up.
Well, I think then we get back to empowerment.
Okay.
If you feel as though you can love yourself and that you're enough and you can be good in your skin as an individual, then you can let people in, but you don't devote everything to them.
Okay.
It's a different, if we're talking in the runaway husband, world,
Yep.
what I'll always say is that subsequent relationships are going to be different. It's not like I have working with a woman who met her husband when she was 19 and they stayed together for 50 years
Wow.
and then he left her. So her whole adult life, everything that happened in her adult life refers to him. But if you can get to the point where you're comfortable in your skin and you love yourself, then in a subsequent relationship, you can have a companion, you can have a partner, you can have somebody, but you know that maybe nothing is forever. So you don't invest in the same way you do when you're 23 or you're 30 or something, and it's you and your partner against the world. You feel as though there'll never be anything else. As long as you keep your own integrity first, then you can bring other people into your life, and you're not at risk of losing yourself.
So we have another question here from a viewer. This person wants to stay anonymous. They want to know, would they ever trust again?
Yeah, sure. Yes. I think if you want to, nobody's saying you have to have a second relationship or a subsequent relationship. It's not necessary. You can have a great life, as a single person. But if you want to have somebody in your life, you can learn to trust again. And maybe the idea is to just to make it explicit, with another person, and say, if I will let you in my life, but if you're ever thinking of leaving, if you're ever unhappy or thinking of leaving, just let me know. It's okay. To sort of tell them in advance. The runaway husbands don't say in advance because they don't want to face the crying wife. They can't take it. They're conflict avoiders. So the last thing they want to deal with is a hysterical crying wife, holding onto their pant legs saying, don't leave me, don't leave me. They can't do that. So they have to run out the door. And that's why there's very little conflict in the relationships, even, when they're married, because he's a conflict avoider and most probably she is also. But in a subsequent relationship, to rebuild trust, maybe you can't rebuild 100% trust, but if you can have 75%, then maybe you can have a nice, loving relationship with somebody else, always sort of knowing that maybe nothing is forever, and that you've requested, please let me know. If you're unhappy thinking of leaving, it's okay. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. So Vikki, where did you find support when this happened to you?
Well, I'm a marriage counselor, a therapist, and I'm part of a community. So a lot of my friends, I'm lucky that a lot of my friends are therapists. So I was able to get support from my friends. I also had a therapist, and I was lucky because this had happened to her. So that was great, because she really understood. She knew what I was going through. And I have 2 adult daughters, and they were the stepdaughters of my runaway husband. So, when he left, they were totally there for me, and they were tremendously supportive. But definitely, I suffered terribly, and I did a lot of work on myself. I just did a lot of reading about loss and about trauma and about how, the dark side of the night, or how to heal your soul, when you've been so deeply hurt. I'm not hearing you. No, not hearing you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now came back.
Technology.
Technology.
So you were mentioning loss. So would it be good to go to a support group, like for grief, for this situation?
I would say no,
No.
because typically a grief group is about death. And so that's why, I suppose that's why the Runaway Husbands community exists. Because one of the workshops that I give last year, I gave a workshop on grief. But it's the grief that comes through this very complex situation. So I don't think a grief workshop would fit the bill for most women who are experiencing this, because the other people are talking about so-and-so died and I loved him and he loved me and it was beautiful the last minutes of his life and all that. And there are so many missing elements to it. You know, one of the other aspects that I haven't touched on yet is the effect on the adult children in families where the husbands run away. And so that grief is felt not only by the wife, but I'm working on a book, my next book, which is called Collateral Damage, which is about the effect on the adult children. The focus is the adult children because younger children typically have, through custody agreements, they have to go to their dad's house and they have to go to their mom's house. And that's a whole nother complex thing. If the dad is living with the affair partner and the children are going to the dad's house with the affair partner, and the affair partner is functioning as like a mom or stepmom for the children, that's a really tough thing for the ex-wife. But the other aspect is the adult children, where they're not mandated to see their father, and where often either the adult children themselves feel like they can't deal with it. You know, they don't want to have to deal with their father and his girlfriend, or they're so angry at him for having betrayed the mother and having betrayed them. If he was lying to the mother, he was lying to them too.
Yeah.
And so that they either put some distance in their relationship with the father becomes more formal and more superficial, or they become estranged from the father. And on the flip side of that, sometimes the men feel like they don't want to have to answer to their adult children. Their adult children are like, you got to tell me what happened. Why is this going on? And they don't want that. You know, remember, they're conflict avoiders.
Yeah.
So they avoid that and they put the distance with the adult children, or they make the stipulation that, you know, if you want me to come to your wedding, he might say to his daughter, you want me to come to your wedding, my wife has to come with you, his current wife, who was.
I've heard that many times.
Yeah, right. So that it creates so much complexity in that relationship that either the adult children or the father feels like, I can't handle this. And so they either, you know, become extremely distant or they become estranged. And so that's collateral damage. That's a secondary effect of what happens when fathers leave. Now, very often when they leave, they're completely clueless about what the outcome of their leaving, you know, what the effect it's going to be, not only on their wife. They figure, she's a strong woman, she'll pull it together, she'll be fine in 6 months. But they totally don't anticipate that the children are going to be really distressed, and that it's going to cause a major rift in their relationship with their children. So they don't expect that at all. And it comes as a shock. And sometimes I've done therapy. Actually, recently I've done therapy sessions with fathers of adult children who are trying very hard to get back connected with the children, but the children feel like, no, you've hurt my mother too much. If I connect with you, my mother's going to feel it's disloyal. And I'll only connect with you if you do two things. One is you take full responsibility and apologize to everybody, which often the fathers are not going to do. And two is you leave that woman, which he is not going to do. So, you know, very often there's like a log jam, and it's very hard to move that stuck relationship between the adult children and the dads.
So you're mentioning the children, the adult children. Is there any resources out there for the adult children on this topic?
I'm working on it.
You're working on it? So that just goes to show that we need services, that we need more awareness, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, certainly there are things, and there are other books for children of divorce. But it's more of a common, typical divorce where there's not the level of betrayal and trauma. And so, yeah, there's not much there specifically for this very, very difficult and complex situation.
Yeah, and that's why I asked you what services would be good for women to go to. And
Yes.
like you're mentioning, there's not enough services out there for this topic, right? And this
Mhm.
is why I wanted to bring you on, Vikki, today and share this topic because we need this awareness. And if for any women out there that are going through this, if you'd like to reach out to Vikki, Vikki, where could they reach you?
Yeah. So the best place is, first of all, go to the website, Runaway Husbands, that's plural, husbands.com. See everything that's available there. My email address is there. But if you're interested in reaching me directly, it's Vikki, Vikki, at runawayhusbands.com. So that's my email address. And really, one of the things that I've learned is that there are so many women who are going through this trauma alone. And I so value you, Liz, and the opportunity to be able to talk about this, because I have to say that the work is so terribly important. There are women who are in profound depression, and sometimes there are women who can't make it. It's just life is too hard. And so it's so important to get the word out, so that people realize that there is a community that can help them recover from this. So I really appreciate and value the wonderful work that you do, with regard to letting me tell my story, but all the other stories that you also support. It's really, really appreciated.
Well, I find that awareness is the key to making changes. If we don't have the awareness, we can't change anything, right? If we
Yeah,
don't know about it, we can't fix it.
yeah.
And that's my goal with Tea Time is to bring that awareness to the table. For all the viewers and listeners that tuned in today, I really want to thank you. And I appreciate you all tuning in and sharing. So, Vikki, any final words before we wrap up your tea time? And the name of the book again that you're writing, and when will it be released? And if it's going to be released in the new year, I can put that up as an update as well so people can check that out.
Beautiful. Yeah. So the new book about how to maneuver through this complex relationship between adult children and runaway dads. The book is called Collateral Damage. It will be out in 2013. Sorry, 2023.
If we could only go back 2013, right?
I'm not so sure, but but I'm not exactly sure what month, but probably at the latter part. And really, the closing message that I really want to give to people, and if you're listening and you're not personally impacted by this, but you're struggling with something else in life, that life can be very hard. Life can be very hard. But for you to be able to recognize that if you put one foot in front of the other, keep going and try to reach for the light. Don't let bitterness overcome you. And really do that work on yourself and figure out how you can turn a crisis, whatever crisis you're dealing with. It could be a health crisis, it could be a marriage crisis, it could be worries about your children, it could be financial worries, whatever crisis you're dealing with, that to empower yourself, and just sort of be like a tiny tank and just keep moving forward inch by inch. Whatever comes in your way, you'll just go over it. Another thing comes in your way, you'll go over it. And you just keep moving forward, like a little tiny tank. And you will be able to come to another chapter in your life. Sometimes when we're in the midst of it, we can't see that there's a next chapter, but there's always a next chapter.
I like that you said that there's always a next chapter
Yes.
because it gives women hope. It gives the wives hope and the children hope that
Yes.
there is another chapter. Even though dad left or your husband left, there is another chapter, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And with that final chapter, before we wrap up, Vikki,
Mhm.
what has your chapter shown you about yourself as an individual?
Well, I like to joke that when my husband left, as he was walking out the door, he didn't realize that he left a precious gem behind. So he gave me a phenomenal gift, which is the work that I'm doing, which I love, love, love. The women I've met that I love, 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 and this wonderful opportunity to do something to help people while I'm enjoying doing it so much. And so, we really appreciate him for having all of the women in my community. We all appreciate. We want to send him a big thank you. Thank you so much for leaving Vikki, so that you can realize. I never, in the early days, I never thought that there was going to be such a light, beautiful opportunity. I mean, of course, for me, it's extraordinary that I've had this opportunity. It's not the same for everybody, but definitely, that my life has become so much better after he left. But it's not only me, for a lot of the women too.
It was that hidden gem that made a new chapter.
Exactly.
And I want to thank you, Vikki, for joining me today in the studio and sharing your story, because it's not an easy one. But,
Yes.
you know, things need to happen in life in order for us to help other people, to
Yes.
help impact other lives. And sometimes it's only one life that will impact thousands with what their choices are.
Yeah.
If it hadn't have been for him not leaving, this would not be here today and we would not have this awareness. So I
Yes.
want to thank you again, Vikki, for sharing that with us and sharing it to the viewers and listeners. And if you're watching a replay, please let me know where you're tuning in from, because I always like to know where my listeners are tuning in from. And if you have any questions and you'd like to reach out to Vikki, and you can find Vikki, I'm sure you can. But if you can't, you can always reach me, Miss Liz, on all social media platforms. And I'd be happy to direct you to Vikki for any questions, or if you're going through something and you just need someone to talk to, I'll relate the message to Vikki. So, Vikki, again, thank you for joining me,
Thank
and
you.
I hope that you'll be able to join me back in December when I do a reunion show of all the guests from Teatime,
Great.
and bringing awareness to a topic that needs to be spoken about. We need to start bringing these hard topics to the table. They are triggering, but they need to be brought to the table in order to bring the change.
Mhm. Thank
So
you, Liz.
again, thank you so much. But don't forget, we have a second tea time coming tonight at 7 p.m. where JP Maclean is coming in, and she's going to be talking about her supernatural thriller books and all of that good stuff. And she's also a human resource worker. So we're going to talk about a lot of good, juicy stuff tonight. So grab your tea for the evening and join me for a second tea time. That's right, it's a double show today. And then next week, we'll be talking about mental health with Adam Duvall from the UK. So we're jumping into the UK, and then we're back into Canada with Natasha Dean, where she'll be talking about children's books and all of that good stuff, and how one story makes a difference at a time. So there's a lot of good stuff coming on Tea Time. So be sure to check out Tea Time and give a quick subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you can see all the tea times that have been there for 3 seasons. And if one tea doesn't relate to you, another one will, I guarantee. There are topics from all different areas in life. So again, Vikki, thank you for joining me. It was an honor having you here. And I hope to see you back in December for the reunion show. And I hope to hear from all of you viewers how you would like to see something new in 2023, because Miss Liz is working on season 4. So again, thank you. And I will see you guys all at 7 p.m. tonight, Eastern Standard Time. And for all of the countries that don't do time change, remember we had went back 1 hour. So be sure to check your time zones for tea time. And again, thank you, Vikki, for joining me. Thank you to the viewers. Thank you to the comments that were coming in that I shouted out to Vikki during the show. And thank you for the viewers that tuned in and that would like to stay anonymous. I do respect you. And I want to thank you again for joining me. So we will see you all at 7 p.m. tonight for a second tea time.